Okay, hello and welcome once again to another Omnia Performance podcast. And once again, we have our resident and chief nutritionist here with us, Mr. Thomas McClure. Do you ever get Thomas? Or if you do you feel sort of pugnacious about it? Stop calling me Thomas, my name's Tom.
Normally when I'm in trouble.
Is that your Sunday name? Yeah. Only your mum calls you Thomas, not only when she's angry.
That's the one.
We'll stick with Tom then. Tom's here, and we're going to dig in today to a subject that's kind of really popular at the moment, and I think we can hopefully add some value to people, which is nutrition around Hyrox competition, or Hyrox participation, I guess we could say is probably a better way to put that. Before we do that, before we dig into those weeds, we'll do the usual stuff and ask people to subscribe, to like, to share, to use whatever social media platform you're using to tell other people about this particular podcast, and just get involved and message us and tell us how much you love us and all that kind of stuff. There are probably other things I've forgotten about, but as ever, I'm going to refer to others as being better at this than me. So, Hyrox, de rigueur at the moment, very popular. I've really enjoyed, for people that want a kind of a time frame stamp on this, the Worlds has just happened over in Nice. That looked like an event just to hang around and have some fun at as well. The whole scene looked amazing. We had representatives from Omnia over there competing. We've got some brand partners kind of running the show over there in certain elements. So we're really quite connected to it. I don't know if you got a chance to watch a lot of it. I think we've had this conversation. You didn't get a chance to see it. I did. I watched the men's elite and the women's elite, and what a fantastic event both of those were. Men's especially coming right down to the wire. So really exciting thing. I think it's safe to say everybody loves Hyrox at the moment. And that means, from an Omnia perspective, we are getting a lot of people taking part. And we've been really very successful with those people. And they come at all levels. People who are just, as I've said, taking part, and some people who are really competing and looking for new PBs every time. One of the key things that comes with any of these events, as you know from experience, is a strong and well catered for, pardon the pun, catered for a nutrition plan. We want to be ready for that. We want to be fully fueled. And we have had people who haven't really quite understood that and maybe come to it, or come to us after having had an event that they felt like they kind of died halfway through and things went a bit pear-shaped, or they just felt all the way through that they were a little bit flat. I know, in fact, although we won't fix this today, but Hunter's just dropped off the first place. Hunter McIntyre as being the number one guy to look at, and one of his complaints was he didn't manage his nutrition right. So it can make or break a really good event, whether that's looking for a PB or whether you're simply looking to enjoy yourself. We all know how it feels to try and attend to something when we haven't fueled properly. So I'm going to let you lead on this because you're the expert, and I'm hoping to pick up and learn things myself as we go here. But I think what we're going to do is run through a kind of a timeline as you would as an athlete, as you would with athletes, approaching competition, approaching the Hyrox event itself, and a couple of kind of things in and around that. We discussed yesterday when we were talking about this, whether or not some people turn up and have a singles event to attend to, then maybe a couple of days later they still stay from the Friday through to the Sunday and do a doubles event. So there might be kind of considerations around that. So we're going to kind of look at that from a kind of how many weeks out do you think, Tom? About 8 to 12?
Yeah, I think if we split this into weeks out, could be somewhere kind of 6 to 8, I would say, is when you can really start dialing in from a nutrition point of view. We're then going to look at what to do the week of, and then look at what to do on race day itself.
Excellent. And that gives us a kind of a timeline, like we say, to ramp in and bring people right to the kind of the pointy end of the stick. We're going to sit down at some point, hopefully you'll be available for that, with Fergus and I, and talk about how Omnia like to program for this, the different protocols and different approaches that we have for it. And some of that comes down to session demand, and some sessions will be different to others, and there's some real granularity of detail in that I'm really looking forward to picking your brain on. But for today, I think we're going to concentrate on that kind of ramp-in approach over that timeline you've just described. So let's go back in time, pretend we're looking at Nice or wherever really, and we'll go back 6 to 8 weeks, as you said. What are we looking at that point? How do we start off from there? That far out? Are we even thinking about this stuff? I would guess yes.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think depending where someone is in their training cycle, the important things to consider here, first and foremost, is to make sure you are fueling your training sessions correctly.
Yeah.
you want to gain good adaptation from the sessions that you're undertaking, whether that's still a strength session, whether you're doing zone 2 work, whether you're doing threshold or sub-threshold work. It's highly likely that at some point training is going to be ramping up and you might be doing a little bit more skill-specific work, but a lot of the time you're going to be dipping in and around that kind of threshold, sub-threshold work, because the event you are training for is going to be somewhere between 60 to 90 minutes for most athletes.
Yeah.
And the majority of that time, probably from the minute you join the kilometer run loop, your heart rate's going to be high.
Yeah.
Adrenaline's going to be going. Hyrox is often a very warm event. I don't know if the prerequisite means you have to do it with your top off, but that seems to be the trend for guys, doesn't it? But from experience, it's a warm event. Adrenaline's pumping, music's going. It's an incredible, theatre of fitness.
Great word, yeah, because that's what it seemed to me, even just looking in on the Nice event, theatre. Yeah.
So
great.
You have to make sure that in your training, you're periodizing your intake to match the demands of that session, so you're getting the most out of the session, and also you can begin to plan, practice, and replicate what works for you.
Yeah.
In terms of potentially breakfast, how you feel, train and perform, snacks that work well for you around training, potentially what you have the night before. And I would also think about considering any logistical challenges that come with your Hyrox event. A lot of people now, to get a ticket, have to travel. Trying to get a ticket for a UK event can be really tricky. So I've noticed more athletes are going abroad, or, they're trying different events. They're using it as a weekend of travel and fitness, etc. So you may well be staying in a hotel, staying in an Airbnb. And with that obviously comes challenges in terms of having access to foods that are available. Yeah,
that's a really good point you make. So let's frame our conversation today around, throwing in as many problems, without exhausting you today, but throwing in as many problems as we can. We'll assume that our athlete is traveling. Let's say that, rather than, me just jumping on the train, maybe going across to Glasgow for an event from here in Edinburgh, which wouldn't be particularly taxing in that sense. Let's consider something like Nice, where you're going into an area you don't really know of before and all the rest of it. Now, I know we'll get to that. We're not there yet. We're still 8 weeks out, but that might be a good framework to use. So 6 to 8 weeks out, like you say, we're starting to kind of look at the sessions and the session demand. We're starting to kind of think about what it is we need to do and how to fuel that and all the rest of it. What would be your general kind of protocols around a training session? And again, like you say, we're looking at athletes that have a kind of the likelihood is, as you say, 60 minutes and under, we're talking about athletes that are very, very high level. But somewhere between 60 and 90 minutes is generally what we're looking at for the overall timeline of effort. So how are we feeling that? What are we doing when we take us through a day? And let's say my training session's around, 2:00.
This is where, for me, backwards planning is really important. So looking at the time of day you're training, let's say lunchtime, afternoon, evening, even first thing in the morning, and setting yourself up to gain good adaptation from that session means fueling for the work that's required. Mm-hmm. If the session is high demand, you need to make sure you're turning up well fueled, well hydrated, so you can perform well. And obviously that will hopefully gain good adaptation, but also support recovery out the other end. Mm. The main fuel source that you will use during a Hyrox and during the majority of your Hyrox training is going to be carbohydrates. So we need to make sure that you're not afraid of them, you're utilizing them effectively, periodizing them around your training, and not kind of backloading calories for the end of the day. Mm-hmm. Rule of thumb, what I like to, if I'm having just a one-off conversation with someone, is work back from your training session. Are you going to have a meal or a snack before you train? If you're going to have a meal, it probably needs 2 to 3 hours to digest. If it's a high performance session that you're going into, you want to be thinking about, can I get around 1 gram of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight? So if I'm 85 kilo, I'm looking to get 85 grams of carbohydrates 2 to 3 hours before I train. That's going to make sure I'm turning up. I'm going to be able to give it my all in that session, rather than going underfueled, struggle, feel sore, potentially get injured, and just not progressing my training leading up to race day. If you've got less time, let's say you've got an hour, 90 minutes before your session, take half of that target. So 0.5 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight. So if I'm 85, what's that, 42 and a bit, say 40 grams of carbs. an hour, half an hour, 90 minutes or so before I train. So that's going to kind of top me up, give me some readily available energy that I can use. Again, hopefully perform well, gain good adaptation, not feel beaten up afterwards.
Mm-hmm. And afterwards, you've fueled for that training session. And like you say, an hour out, we're still able to do something there, still able to take on carbohydrates. And we'll maybe talk about what manner of carbohydrate, how we would do that, because there's something interesting you've said there about those two different timelines that might have two different implications. But afterwards, what are you doing afterwards? Do you want athletes to immediately refuel? Do you want them to wait a while? What would you think?
Almost a similar protocol. It might depend on your logistics. It might be that you've trained and you're going to have the availability to have a full meal. Mm-hmm. So you might want, again, have somewhere between 0.5 to 1 gram of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight. Add to that some good quality protein with it as well. So you're looking to replenish muscle glycogen that you've depleted, repair with protein, and also just consider rehydrating. Yeah. Particularly if you've got a short turnaround, you might be training, say, early the next day, or maybe you're even doing 2 sessions in one day. It's how quickly can you get yourself back to baseline. If there's a logistical challenge around, maybe you've trained at lunchtime and you're going straight back to the office, or you're going to pick the kids up from the school run or something like that, it may be you just want a snack. So it might be, again, you go for a high carbohydrate snack to get muscle glycogen back up and pair that with a little bit of protein. That will see you through that area of time before you then get to that next window of opportunity to have a meal.
Yeah.
What I don't want to see people do is finish training and go a long period before getting something.
That was kind of why I was asking whether or not you felt that there was a timeline within that. And, as I expected you to say, what you're suggesting really is that we kind of sandwich the training session around these kind of... depending on the timeline. So the session's right in the middle of a timeline. If you've only got an hour either side in which to kind of, manipulate your carbohydrate intake, whether that's fueling or refueling, 0.5 would be kind of within that hour, 0.5 grams of carbohydrate per kilo of body weight within that hour. If you can actually have the time to plan that further out, 90 minutes, maybe 2 to 3 hours beforehand, you can up that to 1 gram per kilo.
Absolutely. And this is where the closer you get around your training, easier to digest carbohydrates will be more preferred. You can use fruit. You can use, more concentrated versions of carbohydrates, things like dried fruit. Some people like little kind of like things like saurine loaves, etc. You can use liquid carbohydrate, and out the other end, you can use, similar sources to refuel. You can use obviously liquid protein there. You can use like an all-in-one recovery shake. There's lots of options that you can use, but things that are very easy to digest, things that don't have a lot of fat or fiber. If you've got more time, then obviously things can be a little bit bigger in volume. They can be more fibrous. It might be that you have a chicken wrap for lunch. It might be that you have, oats, something that's, pasta. We've still got some carbohydrate in there, but you don't want to have too much volume, too much fiber that's going to slow down digestion. Out the other end, if you're not training again that day, your meal post-workout can be higher in fat, can be higher in fiber. That's okay, because you're moving away from your workout window, and if you're not training again for another 24 hours or so, speed of digestion is not so important.
The immediate availability of that carbohydrate is not
exactly. The only caveat is if you've got, say, a late session one evening and you're training again first thing in the morning, or if you're doing 2 sessions in a day, then yes, the speed of absorption and digestion becomes a little bit more important there.
Excellent. So actually, when I gave you a daft example of 2 p.m. being my training session, it doesn't really matter. What you need to do is probably reverse engineer what time your training session is. So an example we've discussed in different settings before, I guess, would be, and a lot of people do fall into this bracket, is that where if I have to get out of my bed, my session's probably about an hour later. So I'm getting up at, let's say, 6 o'clock, and I have my training windows between 7 and 8:30 before I start work at 9. That's assuming somebody lives relatively close to work, but you get the picture. Is in that setting, as you've just described, there are still options, because I think we find a lot of people then think, well, I haven't got time to have a meal. What I'll do is I'll hit the session and then I'll just feed afterwards. And they miss the opportunity to fuel for that session and get the most out of it. But in that scenario you've just described, liquid protein and some kind of even a liquid carbohydrate or fruit or the options that you gave, if you still have 60 minutes, 45 to 60 minutes even before that session, those are still perfectly good options to kind of fuel that tank, correct?
Yeah, absolutely. Fantastic.
Excellent.
And cycling back round to the logistics, and like I say, the more you can plan and prep ahead with any travel arrangements and just start to get an idea of either what you will have access to in terms of, jump on Google, have a look at supermarkets, restaurants, hotels, what's around you. But think about 2 key meals, I think, in this window, 6 to 8 weeks out, which is what you're going to eat for breakfast on race day. Mm-hmm. Potentially doesn't need to be portable. You're going to be in the car, on the train, on public transport. Are you going to have to take it with you? How can you replicate that wherever you're going to go? Mm-hmm. And then think about your evening meal the night before, particularly if you are traveling. Again, do your research. How can you make that similar as possible to what you'd have at home?
It's a really good heads up for as we get closer to this imaginary event. Is the point that you've just made is if you are traveling, which is one of the kind of scenarios we suggested, and you are meeting people, and this is a kind of a social event for you, the likelihood is you can say, let's go for a meal the night before. You probably want to start thinking about what that actually means to you in advance. And I think as we get closer to the event in your timeline here, we'll probably address that. But yeah, it's good to have that, I think, as a kind of a heads up now. What are we, 6 weeks out? Don't start thinking about it 3 days out. You're going to flap and panic and probably get it wrong.
Exactly.
Let's start thinking now.
Get it nailed in, get it boxed off. And, as you've often given me advice around, things like race kit and, try everything out so that it just removes that stress and the worry. Yeah. If you know it's dialed in, if you know what works for you, then hopefully you can practice, rinse and repeat, replicate it, and then, let's say, not have the stress and the worry around it come
and it's really good practical advice as well. I keep suggesting Nice, but only because it's in my head. But if you were going to go out there to what is essentially a foreign country, and there's friends, and you don't want to be getting, and this is something that people do anyway, regardless of training, isn't it? They get there and think, what shall we eat? Oh, I don't know. And then they flap around looking at different restaurants and realize they can't speak French, and the whole thing gets a bit horrible. Is if you plan out in advance, you can use all kinds of internet guides and reviews and all the rest of it, and find something that suits your palate, suits your wallet, but also something that might be relatively close to the hotel and things, something that takes all the stress out of it. Because one of the things you're doing here with this advice isn't just teaching people the sort of physiological parameters that they want to operate in for adaptation and performance. It's also stress reduction, isn't it? Because the stress itself of trying to make these decisions and trying to find yourself at the start line thinking, I have done everything I need to do, I'm just going to fucking really enjoy this experience. If they think, God, that chili last night's just, and that's all I could get, then it ruins experiences, and it can ruin it on the way in, because if you're super, super stressed on the way in, you find yourself at the start line, it's all been a bit of a blur, and you didn't get to experience Hyrox the way you might have wanted to. So, I think that there's real value in highlighting that this isn't just what to eat, what to fuel, this is actually like how to reduce stress around that, which is vital, isn't it?
Yeah, fantastic. There's just one more thing to kind of think about 6 to 8 weeks out, and that's supplementation here.
Okay.
2 camps to maybe think about is supplements, one to practice and replicate with, and then supplements to think about ensuring that you're taking consistently to help with performance.
Okay.
So I would say the big 2 supplements to aid with performance to think about 6 to 8 weeks out, if you're not already taking them, would be creatine and beta-alanine.
Okay.
Creatine is something we keep banging the drum about, but for all the right reasons.
Yeah, I don't think we'll stop doing that for the foreseeable, will we?
ATP, CP, energy system, force and power production, cognitive function, muscle mass,
and for something like Hyrox as well, all the data points, all the research, which is huge in creatine, every one of them points to this being like the perfect example of where this is expertly utilized, isn't it, by the body? Yeah. So creatine, that absolutely.
And then beta-alanine. You have to remember Hyrox is 8 kilometers and a bit more of running at threshold. And the rest of the time, your heart rate is going to be right up there. Get on those sleds, it's heavy. You're sprinting on the ski erg, etc. Those 100 wall balls at the end on heavy legs. You're operating under fatigue with a high heart rate. If we can delay that fatigue, if we can, just buffer that lactic acid build up a little bit, it's going to help maintain performance, not only on the day, but also in your training sessions.
This is I'm kind of hanging over as you can see, I'm hanging over the microphone to say, because there's one thing that I wanted to refer people back to that you've been really good at pointing out before in previous podcasts is the loading of beta-alanine. Because I think, and we'll cover this off very quickly again, is that people still think that beta-alanine is something you would take before a session. So, I don't normally take it. I'm used to it. I know how it feels like, et cetera, et cetera. I'll just smash this before Hyrox. But just smashing a dose before Hyrox isn't going to, you're not going to get the benefits that you're actually looking for.
Yeah, you want your muscles, like creatine, to be fully saturated. Okay. So let's think high performance habit. Let's get a creatine supplement. Let's get a beta alanine supplement. Let's add it to a drink. You can have it around training if you want, if that's a good habit for you to have. But you can consume both supplements any time of day. But you need to take them 7 days a week for a period of about anywhere between kind of 3 to 5 weeks. So this 6 to 8 week period is perfect to get yourself to that full saturation point so you see the benefit. Yeah, sometimes beta alanine, we see people take it just on training days, or it's stacked in a pre-workout supplement, so they don't get the full benefit from being fully saturated. Yeah,
and you're right to highlight the 6 to 8 weeks, because if you look at 3 to 5 weeks, or 3 to 4 weeks, I suppose, as being the loading base for this, you want to make sure that you don't have any contraindications with that as well, because some people, very, very few, but some people do find that either one of those has sort of a negative, a deleterious effect. Very few. I've only met maybe 2 in all my time coaching, but it's worth finding that out before you start loading it up, and then 3 weeks out, you're like, oh, I've got the trots or whatever it might be. So yeah, load these things up. Anything else at this timeline, or are we really just setting the scene and practicing and making sure?
Would only be to practice and replicate anything you're going to use on race day. So if you're someone who likes to use caffeine, whether you want to use caffeine gel, caffeine gum, an energy drink, etc., practice it, replicate it, so you know how much you're going to take, when you're going to take it before a training session. If you want to consider using nitrate supplements, again, make sure you don't have any adverse reaction from consuming, a nitrate shot 90 minutes to 2 hours before a training session. Again,
now is the time.
Now is the time to practice and replicate, so that, again, come race day, you know what works for you. You've got everything laid out and organised, and you're good to go.
Excellent. So we're closing in on the race itself now. Event is T-minus 2 weeks now? Is that our next timeline? Or
I think we go week of.
Should we go week of? Yeah. Okay. I guess you're right. Yeah, we're going to play this game that you've just described right up until the week out. And so what changes in the week of? What are we thinking about now? Some of it's going to be logistical, presumably.
Of course, yeah. There's the logistical challenge. The big message I always bang the drum of in a week of competition is nothing new or different. Yeah. Now is not the time to experiment.
Chili I referred to.
Now is not the time to experiment with supplements, experiment with new recipes. Hopefully you've got a really good base of meals you like, things you like to eat and drink. You know what works for you. If you've got those travel and logistic challenges, personally, I'm a big fan of taking control of that by getting something like an Airbnb, where you've got a fridge where potentially you can cook, you can prepare, you can go to a local supermarket and you can buy foods that are very similar to potentially what you've got in the UK, rather than relying on hotel, restaurants, etc. So take control as much as you can. The big question I get asked when it comes to Hyrox, leading into competition day itself, is should I carb load?
Okay. Now, and should we?
Here's the interesting thing, is that most people are going to take between 60 to 90 minutes. That's the window we're looking at. And they might say, well, I can go out and train for 60 to 90 minutes and work hard, etc. But we're looking at to get you to perform at your best. So my answer would be, why wouldn't you carb load? Why wouldn't you want to start with the tank fully saturated? You're going to go into an event where, like we've already spoken about, it's warm, it's a theatre of fitness, your adrenaline's going to be up, you're probably going to go off too quickly. The likelihood is, working at that high threshold, you're going to burn through the stored energy you have quickly. Yeah. There's
something to be said, sorry to interrupt you, Tom, there's something to be said for that adrenal kind of build-up as well beforehand. Your system's ramped up before you've even started moving. That's worth noting, isn't it?
Yeah. So starting with the tank full is going to put you in a position to potentially perform well all the way through the event, rather than, say, by the time you've done your warm-up, by the time you get to the start line and halfway through the event, I see sometimes a lot of people drop off. And is that down to a muscular fatigue, or is it down to a lack of substrate and a lack of energy? So it's something to consider doing, again, and practicing a little bit and replicating is, yes, increasing the amount of carbohydrate that you consume 24 hours out from competition day.
Now, let's run through very quickly the protocols you described for somebody carb loading, because what we don't want people to do is to start cookie monstering all the bread that they can see, or smashing as much Haribo as possible. Well, I'm carb loading, so now I've got free reign to just snaffle everything in sight. There are limitations to well, ultimately, if you fill your belly up with loads of crap, you're going to feel bad. You're going to have transitory kind of issues, and you're just creating GI upset further down the line. So you don't want to be halfway through thinking, "Oh my God, my tummy's turning because of all the carb loading I did." So take people through, if you can, Tom. Put you on the spot here a little bit. What you would suggest a good carb loading protocol would be. I know we've gone through pre-training protocols. You're half a gram per kilo or a gram, et cetera, et cetera. Do you have a kind of a parameters and numbers that you would suggest?
Yeah, there is a range, I think, to work off. And again, everybody might feel a little bit different. So again, ideally, maybe if you're replicating your training X number of weeks out from the event, you should replicate your carbohydrate loading, have a practice, have a go at this. Yeah. Would be somewhere between 6 to 10 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight.
Yeah.
So if someone is 100 kilo, to make it nice and easy.
Over what time frame? Sorry, Tom.
24 hours.
24 hours, yeah.
You don't necessarily need to think about 48 hours, 72 hours before. This is not an Ironman. Yeah. We're only going to have, let's say, 60 to 90 minutes of effort. Yeah. So 6 to 10 works really well, I find, for most people. Some people prefer the lower end. Some people feel really good on the upper end, or be in the middle. It's absolutely fine. Within that range, yeah, there's some things to think about. One is how to distribute it across the day. Mm-hmm. What I see people get wrong sometimes is backload it and think, right, the last meal of the day, I'm going to go big on the pasta, big on the pizza.
Yeah.
I would do the opposite. I would go big at the first part of your day. Give your body the maximum amount of time to digest and absorb this. So breakfast, effectively like a second breakfast, lunch. You want to just be drip feeding things right across the day. Doesn't necessarily mean you have to over consume in calories. You can drop your dietary fat intake down. Mm-hmm. You can have a similar kind of protein range to maybe what you normally do. But again, you might just want to take it down a little bit. Maybe 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight of protein is great, rather than say 2 grams, to depend on what you normally have.
Yep.
So it gives you more space within your calorie budget to increase your carbohydrate intake.
Very good point, yeah.
Easy to digest carbs are brilliant. So the white varieties of pasta, rice have less fiber. They'll move through your digestive system quicker. Dried fruit, fantastic. Things like honey, syrups that you can easily add on top of porridge and yogurt, etc. Liquid carbohydrates to sip on across the day, brilliant. And just start early. Don't, let's say, leave things until the afternoon and the evening. Most people will have, hopefully, fingers crossed, tapered their training down as well. So it's a real nice balance to increase carbohydrate load, reduce your training, and you should hopefully kind of be saturating nicely across the week anyway. And then, let's say, around 24 hours before, the day before, is the opportunity to carb load. 2 things to be aware of. Fat will slow down digestion. So fatty meat, salmon, etc., nuts, seeds, peanut butter can slow down digestion. So you might want to reduce the amount of those you have in that day. You might want to choose leaner sources of protein, chicken, white fish, etc. And fiber is the big one as well.
Yeah, I had a question about fiber, but you've covered a lot of it. Please carry on.
Yeah. Can't believe the nutritionist is going to say this, but if there's a day where I'm not too worried how many vegetables you eat, it's the day that you want to carb load. Yeah. If you still want to have some spinach, tomatoes, peppers, these are kind of very water-based. These will digest relatively quickly. If you have broccoli, cabbage, cauliflower, these things are a lot more fibrous. They're going to take longer to digest. So there's nothing wrong with eating a little bit more beige on this kind of day. Have chicken, potatoes, chicken, rice. Again, talking back to our previous point, practice a meal the night before a big training session that you feel good on, is easy to prepare, is easy to digest, and potentially you can replicate wherever you go. If you know you can get chicken and rice or chicken and pasta, fantastic. What are you going to have for breakfast? Can you replicate it? And you should be good to go.
Yeah, it's really good advice, Tom. Because one thing that we used to do with fighters, which is a good analogy for this, the very same thing really, is that a good 6 to 8 weeks out, if we could talk them into this, some of them didn't want to do it, we'd take them through a kind of I was going to say a pretend cut. It was a real cut, because a lot of them are cutting water and they're doing different protocols to make weight on a specific day. Not the same scenario. But the reason we do it 6 to 8 weeks out is so that they understood how their bodies felt, how they reacted to certain, because then we'd have to refeed them carbohydrate, which is not a dissimilar process. And knowing how they felt and how that felt psychologically, even right down at the point where some people have a relationship with food where this might feel very alien to them. They're very, we're suggesting people become quite considered and quite practiced in their food protocols. And then we're saying, oh, and on this one day, do something that feels very, very different. So practicing that a set amount of weeks, maybe back to that 6 to 8 weeks out, and just trying that. How does it feel? What's the availability of the things you've just described? Do I even know what all those beige foods are? all that kind of stuff. It's worth considering that early, because what we don't want, again, is to get to that 1 week out, or get to that night before, or get to this 24 hours out that we are now and think, shit, how do I carb load? What do I need? Do I have to rush to the shop? Do I have to do this? Let's have all that kind of information available to us. So practice. I think I think that's a mantra throughout this whole conversation. Isn't
Absolutely. It? And again, just talking about supplements, a supplement you can consider taking anywhere between 3 to 7 days leading up to race day is, again, nitrates.
Okay.
There's research that shows nitrates do have an acute effect, so a one-off effect. You can take a nitrate shot, as we've already said, 90 minutes to 2 hours before. But also you can take a nitrate shot. You can take 1 to 2 shots, again, 3 to 7 days leading up to an event. If you know the shot itself doesn't sit well on the day that you use it for training, then you can take it, obviously, anywhere, let's say up to 7 days out, and then just not take it on the day itself, but it's still going to be in your system. Nitrates are a great vasodilator. They're going to help with blood flow, help strength and endurance performance.
Excellent. More good advice. So we've carb loaded. We've given ourselves that time to do that. We're now day of. I won't give you a pretend time to work towards. We'll just look around, because everybody's going to start different times, different waves, and all the rest of it. And I think the only other caveat that we'll look at is whether somebody, and we'll come to this in a moment or two, is whether somebody has another race a couple of days later. But we'll cover that off with this particular day. So we're here. It's the day of. We've just got out of beds and realised what the hell we've signed up for. Super excited, all that kind of stuff. Where do we start?
I would say a little checklist to have is, and I'll go back through each one, but a nice checklist to have is hydration status, race day breakfast, and then your meal, snack, or top up, depending on your time.
The time, yeah.
Hydration. Let's get up. Let's get hydrated. We know that Hyrox, we're going to sweat. It's going to be a warm event. What you don't need to be doing is kind of chasing your hydration during the event. And obviously there are some rules and parameters that prohibit drinks being passed to you, etc. Sure. We're not able to carry liquid nutrition kind of with us. So we need to make sure we turn up on the start line hydrated. So why not, as soon as you get up in the morning, think about electrolytes. That's going to aid the water that you consume move through and increase your hydration at a cellular level. It's just a really good, let's say, high performance belt and braces approach, rather than then chasing your hydration an hour out from your event and you're guzzling on loads of water and then you're just having to go to the toilet all the time. Let's get hydrated as early as we possibly can, particularly if your start time is probably in the first half of the day as well.
Yeah.
Secondly, breakfast. We should have a high carbohydrate with a moderate amount of protein at breakfast. Again, depending on how long you've got, you could be, I don't know why, every time I did men's doubles, we were off at 8 o'clock.
So you did not have long.
It did not have long. So we would use the kind of 1-to-1 approach. So 1 gram of carbohydrates per kilogram of body weight about an hour before, that 1-to-1. If we had more time, we would go about 2-to-2. So 2 grams of carbohydrate per kilogram of body weight around 2 hours before.
Yeah.
A little bit of protein in there. That might be from a bit of yogurt, a little bit of peanut butter, kind of maybe like a half serving of protein shake. Hopefully, again, you should know what you're going to have. But easy to digest carbohydrates are always going to be preferable here. Might be a bagel, might be sourdough. If you're short on time, you probably don't want to be having oats because they're going to take a little bit too longer to digest.
Good advice, yeah.
If you want to use liquid nutrition, fantastic. But again, hopefully this is something you've dialed in. You've been training your body in a way as well. Make sure you've trained your gut so you know what works for you. Consider any logistical challenges like I've always spoken about in terms of whether you're going to have this in a hotel room, be sitting on public transport, eating bagels, whatever it is.
Yeah, yeah.
The third point is then, again, a little bit of backwards planning. Looking at your heat time and working back, thinking about what time am I going to warm up? Do I want to have a meal, a snack, or even a carb top up leading into that event. So a bit like what we spoke about with training sessions, working backwards. If we've got 2 to 3 hours before our, say, afternoon heat time, we might want to have a lunch. Mm-hmm. Still moderate carbohydrate, a little bit of easy to digest protein, but probably not much else.
Yeah.
Chicken wrap, something like that would often really easy, really portable. It's going to give us everything that we need, but no fiber, no fat. Super.
Just to interject there as well, is to if you have got an afternoon start or something at Hyrox and you're there and you've done all the protocols you've said, just be aware that everybody else is also queuing for these kind of, because there are food stalls and things at these places now and again, but
stay away from them.
Yeah. The opportunity to get hold of that food. You might think, well, I'll just grab something there. There'll definitely be this, that, and the next. And you might have been there the day before and you've looked at it, but then in the moment when you're, just don't, I think, take that into your own hands. Absolutely. That stuff can come afterwards and you can enjoy the event, enjoy, well, I like this burrito stall and all the rest of it.
Leave nothing to chance.
Yeah, you don't know what's there. You don't know what's in it. That's one reason. And secondly, you might not even you might end up in a queue and you're like, fuck, I don't have the time to get, right, I'm going to have to leave it.
Stress.
And now you're not, exactly.
Adrenaline.
Yeah.
Exactly. So you might have time for a meal. No, if not, it might be a higher carb snack, maybe 90 minutes to 2 hours before. It may be that if you're short on time, it may be what I call the 30-30 protocol. Mm-hmm. It might be that around the time you start warming up, you might want to think of 30 grams of carbohydrates 30 minutes before you start. That could be a sports drink, an energy gel, a little chew, would work really well.
All stuff that's easy to pack and bring.
Exactly. Yeah. Non-perishable, doesn't need to be refrigerated. But again, practice this stuff in that 6 to 8 week protocol. Yeah. Practice what's portable, what works for you, what works well for you, what you feel good on, and then just work on that sliding scale. The closer you get towards, it needs to be very easy to digest, and less about how things taste. And you just have to think about, I need to put the right amount of fuel in my body to
you can party afterwards. Okay, that's pretty clear. I think it's very clear. The fact of the matter is, this is my first Hyrox weekend-long experience. I'm clearly in the Elite 15. I've just finished my event, burnt myself out, worked really, really hard, got the first place podium. This is me. We're discussing me, so clearly these are realistic possibilities. But I have the relay, which I believe is a new addition, on the Sunday. What do I do afterwards? After, am I popping champagne corks? Am I getting mad on it? I've had my race. I've got Saturday. This is Friday. I've trained. Friday I've raced. Saturday's free. Sunday is my next. What am I doing, Tom? My go-to, as people who long-term listeners will know, is that I've got a full day. I can have 6 Guinness and smash myself around the place, and I'll be fine for the Sunday. Take me in hand. What am I supposed to be doing?
So, if you've already completed the first event, the likelihood is, again, you will have depleted muscle glycogen. You will have, microscopically torn muscle tissue. How quickly can you get yourself back to baseline? How quickly can you rehydrate, repair, and replenish? I think that starts before you leave the event.
Yeah.
This is a common fault I see, like say, if people have got some sort of turnaround in kind of multi-day events, is that by the time you cross the finish line, by the time you celebrate, photos, get your kit, meet up with your supporters, and get somewhere to have something to eat. Could be 90 minutes, could be 2 hours, could be even longer.
Yeah.
Have something before you leave the venue. Hasn't got to be a full-blown meal, but could be an easy-to-digest carbohydrate snack, could be a little bit of protein, could be a recovery drink, could be chocolate milk, whatever it is, it's just going to kickstart that process. And then think about foods that are going to, let's say, get you back to baseline and keep you there. Enough carbohydrates, good quality protein. Yes, some antioxidant-rich food would be brilliant. Cherries, berries, grapes would be fantastic. An evening meal with some vegetables on Saturday would be great as well. And then just keep an eye on your hydration status across the day. If you have had a very high sweat rate during the event, keep an eye on your urine color. You might want to think about using electrolytes to get you back to a good hydration status quicker, but just maintain that over the next kind of 24 to 48 hours before effectively you've almost got to repeat the process to turn up and compete again. The relay is a shorter event in terms of your own demands, but bear in mind, obviously, you're going to be carrying fatigue. So again, make sure you turn up. You are fueling for the work that is required. You're asking your body to perform high intensity efforts. at threshold pace or above, in a warm environment where your adrenaline's high.
Yeah.
Don't go into it under fuel. Don't go into it underhydrated. Give yourself the best opportunity to perform well.
So no Guinness. Damn it.
Not until after. Not until after.
You're an athlete, Jonny. It's somewhat jocular, but to put me in that position. But we do know many people have that opportunity to do their own singular race, and then something like a doubles or something where they're within their own team or their own unit, and you don't want to kind of go into one and have a great time, and then go into the other and go, oh well, it was the first one that killed me. It might have been the protocols in the middle that did it, So let's just leave all those stones turned. Let's turn them all. I think we've covered off most of the protocols I would expect. I think the key push, rather than summarizing it all, I think that one thing that we want to kind of really hammer home is practice, isn't it? Is to make sure that everything that we're doing has been thought of beforehand. What we don't want people to do, and I'm only reiterating here really, is that we don't want people to turn up at the event and think, all right, what do I do now? Those answers should, I'll do what I've done before really is the answer, barring that little extra effort of carb loading for those who take that advice and take that on. And we've given some kind of opportunities to learn a little bit around that. So practice, isn't it? The reason we've come at this from 6 to 8 weeks out is because we want people to kind of feel fully involved from that distance out. All those sessions in the lead up are fueled so that when we get there, we've had the best prep possible, but also that we're prepped for the day. Anything else to add on that front, do you think?
No, I think you're spot on. You're going to be training and, let's say, replicating movements in your training. You're going to be, practicing the shoes you're going to wear. If you're working in doubles or a relay, you're going to be practicing the transitions, your splits, etc. You're going to put a lot of thought into that. Mm-hmm. You don't want nutrition to be an afterthought. Nutrition, when it comes to Hyrox, can really affect how well you perform, particularly later in the event. I see a lot of people go off in Hyrox, do really well up until kind of station 4, station 5, and then they tail off. They struggle with fatigue. They struggle, let's say, with a lack of substrate, a lack of energy, because either they've not practiced training and replicating their nutrition to match the demands, or they've underfueled the day itself. So again, think about if you want to perform
think about
well.
Those wall balls.
Exactly. Think about, you want to finish strong, you want to perform well, you want to enjoy the event, you don't want it to be a struggle.
Yeah. If
you want to give yourself the best opportunity to do well, it has to be another pillar for you to think about. It's the same with when I talk to triathletes, it's triathlon is 3 disciplines, but actually nutrition is the 4th discipline. And it's a bit of the same with Hyrox in terms of it's running, it's a combination of functional movements, and it's nutrition as well.
You need to be fueled for this. Yeah. And exactly as you've just said, one thing that's really, really key, whether you're at the top end competing, as we have suggested I would be, or whether you are simply there for the sheer fun and joy of it, what we want is people to have the best experience possible. And that could be, podium finish, or it could be just coming out of it going, that was a blast, as opposed to come out exactly as you said, the last 4 events thinking, well, those 4 were just about survival and I really didn't enjoy it, because it should be an enjoyable experience. And if we get these things right, then we're adding to that, or at least not taking something away that would have added to it. So I've enjoyed that, Tom. I really have enjoyed it. I think that there's a lot of takeaways there. And I think when we get the opportunity to talk about how we go about programming directly for Hyrox, it'd be lovely to have you around the table as well to kind of interject and say, this is where this particular protocol really comes into its own, etc. Although I do think most of that's been pretty clear. As ever, much appreciated to have your time and your expertise. I go away from these things every time thinking I need to up my game, and it's always good to have somebody sitting across from you forcing you to up your game. So thanks for that as well, Tom. Anybody who wants to get a hold of you, as we now hopefully know, can use the Omnia channels. Find us where you know we are, or directly where, Tom? What's your Instagram?
Is at tmc.nutrition. And
then we can get Tom there. And any questions you have, put them in the notes here, send us a comment, all that kind of stuff. Hit us up on Instagram and or jump on for more information. If you've got Hyrox coming up, I think the season's just finished, but we're never far away from the next starter. So if you're thinking about prep now, thinking about what your next season looks like now, feel free to give Tom a shout out and have a little bit of a consult on that, and let's get these things right. And with that, thank you and goodbye.